Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Welcome. So I'm Karen Hutzel. I'm the chair of the department here at Ohio State, the Arts Administration, Education, and Policy. And my job is to welcome you all here to Columbus and to Ohio State, to the department, and then obviously to this beautiful space, the Urban Arts Space. This is a facility that is rented by the university, and they've been here maybe 15 years, 10 or 15 years at this point. It serves the arts units at the university and serves as an exhibition space. And right now, we're lucky because, and this was not planned, we're not that well organized, I would say. But we have two exhibits right now, one in the main gallery, and it is the art department faculty here at Ohio State. I encourage you to look around and engage with the work under the exhibit title of Transference. And then in the hallway gallery, which I can't remember the name of right now, thank you, Center City Gallery, is an exhibit that Dana curated for our department, which is our first time really exhibiting in this space. And that consists of work by faculty, students, and alumni from the department. So I really encourage you to engage with the work in each space. So those two themes I've been thinking about a lot. The titles of the exhibits. Assemblage is the title. I may not have said that for the department exhibit. Transference is the title for this exhibit. And I'm thinking about it in terms of us spending most of the next 24 hours together, listening to the work of some of our alumni and then advanced grad students from our three institutions that are represented here. So I want to encourage you to really think about how this GRAE, this experience that we do annually and have done annually for many years, how those themes of transference and assemblage relate to the purposes for coming together and the outcomes of coming together across a field of art education and really considering the work of those who are getting ready to really enter the field as our peers. What ideas and knowledge is transferred in your time here together? What is happening as we assemble as a group across these institutions? What do we have in common? What do we have different? And what are some of the outcomes of your thinking through all of that? So GRAE, like I said, has been around for many years. It really came out of Penn State, and we as an institution here at Ohio State were not involved until a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it's been a real honor for us, for our graduate students to participate and for our faculty to participate as well. This might be our second time or third time hosting here at the university, and we're always excited when you come to visit. One of the things I also want to acknowledge is our department's professional team of staff is a dream team, and we're lucky to have them. Lauren Pace, Michelle Adius, and Brittany Stetner, whose name I just almost messed up. Shelton, oh my gosh, she's really brand new. Hi, Brittany. I didn't mess up your name, I swear. Even so, she's brand new. She stepped in and really took on everything. So Lauren really planned this event. Thank you, Lauren. Today and tomorrow, you'll see the efforts of all of her work. And Michelle Adius, who is wearing 2 hats today, as you'll see tomorrow when she presents as a doc candidate, who is also our department's HR and fiscal officer, and she really runs the department for us. And then also I want to thank the Urban Arts Space team, the folks who keep this space going, who always go above and beyond for us whenever we have an event here. Marine, Emily Euler, Chris Gose, who's the one you've seen running around helping us out. So with that, I want to invite up the department's Graduate Studies Chair, who will introduce our speakers today, Dr. Joni Acuff.
Good evening. So I'm Joni Acuff, and I'm new in this position here. I'm just playing. I'm not new in this position, but this is the first time I've been a part of kind of getting together this GRAE. And so it's really been an interesting experience as the grad studies chair and then thinking about what students may want to hear about as they spend 2 whole days with us. So in that spirit, usually at GRAE, there is a presentation, 2 presentations for that the respondents do, but thinking about the PhD or an MA even, what do you think about when you think about those degrees? What can you do with them? And so as I considered that and talked to the Grad Studies Committee and Lauren and Dr. Hutzel, we were thinking about inviting people as additional guests to speak about what a PhD can look like in the field. And so we thought about not only a professorate, but also an entrepreneurial. So the 2 speakers that I'm going to introduce first, they're showing different parts, different aspects, the spectrum that your degree can offer you. And we felt like it was really important to give that breadth of understanding of, like, you have options. We have 2 people here that have very successful work that they're doing, research, continuing research, and you can do it. So with that spirit, I'm going to introduce first Dr. Melissa Crum, who, and they're also alumni from here, so we, kept that strand there. Dr. Melissa Crum, she is an artist, author, researcher, and founder of Mosaic Education Network, LLC. She leads a consulting company that infuses the arts, research, storytelling, and critical thinking into professional development, community building, and curriculum development. Dr. Crum works with her team of experts to act as engaging and collaborative resources for schools, nonprofits, and companies. With her team, she facilitates and encourages thought-provoking conversations addressing difficult topics on supporting, interacting, and partnering with diverse communities. She works hard to help you become informed of and feel secure about using everyday practical applications of diversity and inclusion strategies to positively impact your environment. To make this happen, she creates a brave space where you can ask the tough questions, admit faults, and celebrate successes. Her experiences working with educators, museums, nonprofits, and businesses has equipped her to help you make social change from your desk to your living room and beyond. And so, Dr. Crum, I know her work because we're friends first, colleagues second, and so I've heard when we were in the department together as students, she was just like, I know I want to do something with this degree, but it's not a faculty member. So I was always like, oh girl, I don't know what you're gonna do, that's gonna be hard. And she did it. And I've always been consistently impressed by her perseverance and in her drive to build her own thing. So I think that her story is a very strong one to give you an example of what can happen outside of the university. Then we have VittoriaDaiello. She is an associate professor and director of the Art Education program, MA program, Creativity and Education in the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning at the University of Cincinnati. Following her dissertation, Study of Television Criticism, writing at The Ohio State University, Vittoria developed a transdisciplinary writing course at DAAP focusing on arts-based experimental writing, employing writing as an artistic analytic tool for thinking and composing collaboratively across disciplines and cultures. Vittoria contributes art education pedagogical perspectives into an international research team in Jiangnan University School of Design in China. In the Experience Design Frontier Methodology and Technology Research Center, she partners with design faculty to explore how research writing can be better taught and achieve greater societal impact through artistic inquiry methods. A transdisciplinary research leadership scholar, Vittoria has received the 2019 DAAP Professor of the Year Award, Ohio State's 2006 Marantz Distinguished Alumni Award, and the 2011 DAAP Award for Outstanding Teaching. Her work is featured in national and international publications, exhibitions, and in art education and design conference proceedings. So Vittoria is going to be able to show us or communicate the ways that faculty move through like the tenure process, or I don't know if that's what your presentation is on, but that's the reason why we thought about her in this position to give us her journey as an academic. And sorry if I'm reading, so I forgot to put my glasses on, and usually I would look up and engage, but you know, my bad. Anyway, so let's welcome Dr. Crum first, and then we'll move right into Vittoria's presentation, and then we'll have questions and comment section right after that. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. So we're just going to jump right into it. So I said I'm Melissa Crum. I'm a diversity practitioner, which is a fancy way of saying I help people think about people who don't look like them and how to consider them in their spaces, right? And an artist, a researcher, and kind of put all those things together to kind of help folks think through those things. So today I'll talk a little bit about how I got here, what I do, and kind of how I do it, and some questions you can be thinking about if there's something you want to be considering. So I came to university wanting to do digital animation as an MFA student. At that time, DreamWorks came to teach us for a year. So they were, at that time, I think they were working on Shrek 2 or something like that, and they screened Shark's Tale. So I remember watching the movie and saying, there's something not quite right about this movie, right? And I couldn't really explain what was wrong with this movie. I didn't have any critical race studies or gender studies or anything like that, but I was like, something isn't quite right here. So if you haven't seen the movie, essentially, it all occurs underwater, and everybody's some form of fish life, right? But we are to read Oscar, who was voiced by Will Smith, as this racialized character, as this black character, right? And we know that not only because Will Smith is voicing him, but because he's introduced to us with this kind of gold chain and his baseball cap, and he quotes these Wu-Tang lyrics, which you wouldn't know unless you listen to Wu-Tang, but you're like, that's a Wu-Tang lyric right there. Then these henchmen have, there's his boss's henchmen, and they have these Jamaican accents, and they're squids, and they have these locks. Their tentacles supposed to be red as locks, right? The sharks have this stereotypical Godfather Italian thing going on. But Lenny, one of the brothers, he doesn't want to be a shark anymore. I mean, he doesn't want to kill anybody, because that's their whole thing, they're mobs. So he says he doesn't feel like a shark. He wasn't born a shark. So he wanted to transform himself into a dolphin and live as a dolphin, which felt like this really watered down, weird trans narrative that was happening. And I was like, there's something weird happening here. But again, I didn't have the language to kind of talk about that. So the department's like, well, we don't care about that type of stuff. We just want you to make sure the gold chain looks like a gold chain. We don't want you to ask us why we put it on there. So I wanted to ask, well, what is art really teaching us, essentially? How might not only traditional art, but pop culture telling us how to think about people, essentially? So I left that department, I went into African American African Studies, and then I was introduced to all this theory, which I had never come in contact before, so I was like eating it all up, right? So reading Bart's around this text and image relationship and how that helps us understand myths and facts and things, and Bell Hooks talking about the gays as well as Fanon, another approach to thinking about the gays, and Ferre and Ahmed, how these stories kind of stick to us in certain kinds of ways. So, but these scholars weren't necessarily talking to each other, right? They're in these different kinds of silos. And so I wanted to think about how might these theorists talk to each other or help inform how I might use art to help people think through some of the stories that they hold. So as Dr. Acuff said, I don't really want to be faculty, but I like teaching, but I don't like everything else that kind of comes with it. I don't like grading papers, I don't be on a committee, I don't do that. So I said, how can I merge kind of art and critical thinking to create a career? And no one in the academy could really help me with that because most professors teach you how to be a professor, which is kind of their job, right? So I had to think about how do I kind of think of something different. So I have these top 5 questions essentially that I needed to kind of ask myself to attempt to solve. And so I'll share those questions and think about how I answer or how I'm continuing to attempt to answer those. So one is, what kind of entrepreneur are you? An entrepreneur is basically what it suggests, this combination of a creative outlet mixed with an entrepreneur drive. So I have this book called The E-Myth. They talk about 3 different kinds of people who start businesses. So one is the entrepreneur who looks at problems or opportunities and turns them into projects. They can turn these conditions or challenges into something. They're visionary, they think of the future, etc. You have managers, people who who are pragmatic. They're thinking about the past and more so the past to inform what they're doing now. And they really want control over the order, right? They're really interested in order, whereas entrepreneurs are interested in controlling the project itself. Technicians are doers, so they're really interested in the present, like getting things done right now. They like control over the process itself, their workflow, etc. Most artists are technicians, right? So they like, are really interested in, like, I want to sing, I want to dance, I just want to act, I just want to do this. I don't be thinking about like marketing strategies and how to price myself, and they don't think about that, right? Oftentimes. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to figure out how to be all of those things, right? And even if you don't have all of these skills, you ultimately have to find a team or create a team who can help you in each of those areas. So I started to think, okay, so what should I do? What are some questions or what are some things I need to do to kind of approach that? So one, I had to ask myself, what do I do well? So you want to ask yourself, what are things I do well? The other thing is, what do I like doing? So there may be things that you do well that you don't necessarily like doing, right? So you want to think about what is that you actually like, what's some things that you do well? And then what will people pay you to do? So you might like making flowers out of shoestrings, and that's awesome, but will people pay for it? Somebody might, right? But maybe not. But where those intersections lie is where your business is. So you want to think about how I might answer those 3 questions. The second question is, what do you do? So if I was to break down the things that I do, essentially I like to teach, or more so kind of share information. So that might be on a panel, that might be like what I'm doing now, it might be formally at the class, whatever it might be. I like to create, so whether that's creating opportunities for people to learn or to create curriculum. And I like to build, meaning build communities, right? So bringing people together for various experiences. So when I start my workshops, I usually start with this story. So when I was young, I loved Disney movies. So me and my brother watched Disney movies like over and over and over again. And the movies that stood out are The Lion King, Aladdin, and Jungle Book. Also at that age, I had a deep fear of people with British accents. Didn't know where it came from. I don't know where it came out of the bushes. I don't know. People with British accents are coming after me, right? And so after doing this work, and I'm thinking through that, it's kind of like, well, where did that come from? Well, all the villains in my favorite movies have British accents. Scar has a British accent in the middle of Serengeti. Why? Right? Jafar has a British accent in the middle of Saudi Arabia. Shere Khan has a British accent in the middle of India. Now, we could say that Disney is trying to inform us of the power of the British imperialism and how they colonize the world, but we know that's not what Disney is doing. But essentially, what they told me was that people who don't sound like me mean me harm. And people who do sound like me are always the heroes. Simba, Aladdin, Mowgli all have American accents. And it's really egregious because Mowgli is being raised by British-speaking animals, right? I mean, the characters that we're supposed to like, Mowgli and Baloo, both have American accents, right? So essentially it's telling me in this other kind of way to be xenophobic. And that story is only funny because I was never put in a position of power to determine whether or not someone with a British accent could live in my neighborhood, if I was going to create policies that impact their lives, if I was creating curriculum that helps them understand or misunderstand the culture that they come from. So what happens if I carry that story and I gain access to power? And that power can be relative, whether that's power in my classroom or power over the country. But fortunately, I had access to other stories about people with British accents. So James Bond I learned that you have a British accent and be a hero. And Paddington Bear, you can have a British accent and be a cuddly teddy bear. But what happens if my story never got complex? And so I remind people that my family, my parents never said, like, don't trust those tea drinkers on the other side of the pond, like those British people are coming after you. Nobody said that, but that was a story that was given to me. And we all have stories that we may or may not have been asked to reread and decide, is it actually serving us in the roles that we're in? So what we do is what I use is contemporary artworks. I try and pick obscure artworks or artworks that are maybe only from artists that are regionally known. But this is a Kerry James Marshall piece, and I stopped using it because now people really know who he is. So what I do is I give these to my teachers or the folks I'm working with, no context, and I say, write a story about the people in this image. No information. And so they get in their groups, they write their stories, and then they share their stories within their groups. And what they realize is that everybody has a different story for these boys. And depending on who you are and your relationship to who you think these boys are will determine the type of story you create. And the same way we do that with images, with painting, with art, we do that with real people. So if these boys are seen as villains or are they seen as kids playing in the yard, when those boys walk into your classroom, when they walk in to be hired in your job, or they walk in to get services into your organization, that story will play in your mind when you decide to work or not work with them. And you may not have been told that story directly growing up or had a villainous grandmother or something like that, but you got that story. And so that starts this process of thinking through, does that story serve me in what I'm trying to do, or who I think I am when it comes to considering people in this image? And so I work with folks all over, whether it's K-12 teachers or museums, whether I do it by myself or I work with other colleagues. This is me and Kiana, who's also alum here in Texas, working with some art teachers. And so going through this process and helping them think through how might there be stories you have yet to investigate. So a couple folks I work with, Juilliard, I've been working with them for the last 4 years. They have students that teach music in the New York public schools, and so helping them think through what assumptions might they have about the students that they're engaging and how to kind of work through that. The Wexner Center here and other arts and museum institutions. So if Juilliard represents higher education, this is an example of art museums working with their docents and museum educators to think through why they're making certain choices when they move through the galleries, why they're talking about certain pieces and not others, or how they're talking about certain kinds of pieces. What story might they be bringing into their spaces that's guiding how they're doing their talks with visitors. As I mentioned before, I also like to create curriculum. So I was, Americans for the Arts is an example of an organization who asked me to create curriculum. This is a video series, a 6-module video series that helps art institutions, arts organizations that are under the umbrella of American arts across the nation to help them better understand how to work with their diverse artists, so things that they may not be thinking about. So this is a course that they've done for the last year, and so I brought on other art educators to help write it. Chabrion's not here, but Chabrion who's part of this department, also helped out with this. So that's another way of me liking to teach, but not liking to grade, because I'm not grading now. Give it all to them, gave them the quizzes, have fun. Also, with the community, I had an opportunity to get a TEDx license, so to do live TED events, but specifically got a TEDx license for the King Lincoln Bronzeville neighborhood, which is a historically black neighborhood here in Columbus. So the way we set up our rules is we tell stories of people who live in the community or who have research or experiences that impact the people who live in that community. We get emails from folks all over the country wanting to speak, but like, you don't live in a neighborhood, what your work is not here to impact the neighborhood. And so that's how we continue to build, to let folks know who may have assumptions about that area. Here's a way for their stories to live consistently, because once the live event is over, we upload. TED, the big TED in Canada, uploads their videos, and then they get to see those stories from the community. 3, why do you do it? So thinking through, for me, why do it is recognizing how our stories inform how we use our power, and how we use those power in the institutions in which we reside, and how those institutions then impact systems. When I was, I believe, a master's student, I had the opportunity to work in a high school. And I was working in this English class and thinking about creative ways to teach English, and I've been with them for a few weeks. One day, the student comes in, and he walks in, he slams the door, he puts his head on the desk. And so I thought, okay, kind of interrupted the class, but I'll just kind of wait till we get a break and ask him, like, what's going on. Well, I didn't really get control of the class, so they started to get a little rowdy. So Ms. Smith, who was the teacher of that class, who was in the back kind of grading papers, said, DeJuan, you guys need to be quiet. So DeJuan, come to find out, is the name of the gentleman that walked in and put his head on the desk. So he sits up and he says, I wasn't even saying anything. I wasn't even talking. Why are you always talking about me? So now I said, okay, maybe we should just jump right back in this lesson and pretend that didn't happen. Well, that didn't work. So I turned around, got a chair, turned around, faced the students, and I said, okay, what just happened? And the student said, well, Ms. Smith said DeJuan was saying something, he wasn't even saying anything. And I said, DeJuan, well, what just happened? She always has something to say to me. She always says something to me, I wasn't even doing anything. And I said, you're right. I mean, you literally was doing nothing. But I said, you're right, you weren't doing anything. And I get that's accurate for you, that's fair for you to share that. I said, but what if I gave you a greasy paper bag, what would you do with it? He said, I'd throw it away. And I said, well, what if I gave you a velvet box, what would you do with it? He said, I'd open it. I said, what if there was a diamond in each of those things? So you sharing your injustice, that someone is picking on you unfairly, is a diamond. That is information that should be shared. The thing is, people are perceiving you sharing that diamond to be in a greasy paper bag. The unfortunate thing is, you have adults around you that are expecting you to always deliver your information in velvet boxes. We have full-grown adults that don't know how to communicate their feelings effectively. But we're expecting you as a teenager to be able to. And I said, it's unfortunate that you are expected to always communicate in this velvet box. But you have to, because boys like you oftentimes don't get to be mad without a consequence. And so, thinking about how might I support not only the DeJuans, but more so the Mrs. Smiths and thinking through why might we have these expectations for certain students and not others. So there's this quote that I found that helped to ground my why, particularly as I was working with teachers. Some people have developed theories about teaching inner city youth, and most of those theories are predicated on preparing these youth to participate in mainstream while never questioning the sanity of joining a system that systematically oppressed and exploited the very youth we are teaching. If preparing them to be productive citizens is the bottom line of what we do, then we might as well be teaching courses in suicide. I do not apologize for my stance. I advocate for education for liberation, not education for mainstream socialization. This comes from an artist out of New Orleans. And so that quote began to ground my why in how I'm thinking through helping people think about the stories that they're bringing to their classroom, to their spaces, to their museums, to their corporations, and how they're impacting the lives of the people that they're interacting with. So now grounding that also in research, having, this happened to come out of the Curran Institute, but Black students being 3.5 times more likely to be suspended for the same infractions as their white counterparts. Thinking about that, how those stories and assumptions about students feed into the school-to-prison pipeline. Oftentimes that research is grounded in how Black boys are treated, but oftentimes erases the impact of Black girls. Black girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended or be placed in detention for the same infractions as their white female counterparts. So thinking about how these stories about these children, for example, Keisha, who's having a bad day, will be suspended or kicked out or said it's subordination. But if Mary's having a bad day, she gets a talk. She may get some cookies. She said, you might need a rest. So take a moment, we'll talk about this. Keisha doesn't get that grace. So why is that? What story do we have about these 2 different students that were treating them so differently? 4, what benefits do you offer? So this is, as I was thinking about how to answer this question, I remember this picture I took when I did a workshop with the Fisher College of Business. This I have 5 minutes, so I'm gonna go really fast. It says, and this is their MBA program. These are folks who are in corporate, coming back to their MBA and going back to corporate. The quote said, in my past corporate experience, diversity training has sometimes been uncomfortable or boring. This training was the opposite. Dr. Crum encouraged us to complete some thoughtful reflection which helped reveal the biases we carry with us and identified ways to address these biases in a positive way in the future. I would highly recommend it. So you want to ask yourself, what need are you addressing? What question are you answering? What experience are you providing? And so for me, the need I'm addressing is helping folks understand diversity, equity, inclusion concepts. The question I'm answering is how those concepts apply to your industry, whether it's school, museums, corporations. And the experience I'm providing is an honest and welcoming, supportive, not necessarily comfortable, but supportive environment to help break down and think through those concepts. So last question, how do you let people know who you are? So you might be really great in what you do, but how are you sharing that with the people who may want to support you? So I had an opportunity to do a TED Talk. When people solicit my services, they either have seen my TED Talk or they know somebody who's been in a workshop that I've done. And so this was, if you have an opportunity to take advantage of free publicity, and that's essentially what this was. I also had opportunities to be on panels with the United States of Women. I had an opportunity to be a part of Creative Mornings, was a national platform that I had an opportunity to be on. So thinking about where are your people, who are the people who care about what you care about, and where do they exist, and how to find them, and then reach out to them to let them know what you do. So as you're thinking about how to, what to do and what opportunities to take advantage of, you always want to ask yourself, does this opportunity connect to my mission and the purpose that I want to reach? Does this opportunity expand my community? Have you defined who the people are that need to hear what you want to share, the people who are willing to pay for the things that you want to talk about? Does it help me build relationships with organizations, institutions, or individuals who could support my cause? And does it build your skill or brand? If you recognize that it doesn't do any of those things, it might be really cool. But if it doesn't do these things, then you gotta say no, right? So always go back to that purpose statement. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Vittoria Daiello, and I'm here from the University of Cincinnati, College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. And I will just say up front here, my presentation will not be as smooth or as eloquent, I think. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. And I'm left with thinking about, the purpose, the idea of purpose, like figuring out what it is you want to do with your degree. I have to say, when I arrived at OSU in 2002, I was working as an artist in residence in the public schools. And I was also, teaching art in an elementary school. And absolutely loved what I was doing, but it just felt like there was more to do, more to know. So I ended up at OSU, and so I'm going to speak with you today about my time at OSU a little bit, and then what I'm doing at the University of Cincinnati, and hopefully give you some ideas about ways of using your degree. I'll begin with a concept maybe some of you know about from Maxine Greene, the concept of Wideawakeness. Yeah. So that's always been, ever since I found Maxine Greene, this was in one of the seminar courses that I had. It was a reading course, I think with Dr. Stout, and Mindy was in that class too. And we read lots and lots of books, Elliot Eisner, and that's my introduction to Maxine Greene and the concept of Wideawakeness. And I still keep that as one of those guiding lights for myself, is this imperative to help people find those experiences or those moments where the world shifts and they can see in a completely different way. And I think about it too as widened awarenesses, not just wide awakeness. So when I was a doctoral student at OSU, two opportunities, which I looking back now, came to really influence my time now. One was being a GA, graduate teaching assistant for the Criticizing Television course. And the other was working as a teaching assistant for the Writing Across the Curriculum program. The Criticizing Television course, which I just spoke with someone earlier, I guess the course is still going on, and it's a second-level writing course that me as an art educator being asked to develop the course by Terry Barrett, I felt completely out of my league. I was never trained as a writer, but I did feel that art education had something really important to contribute to the teaching of writing. So I'm going to share with you a couple of glimpses. Over the years, my interest in artists and art educators' writing has expanded into questions about the various forms of awareness and types of knowledge that arts-based writing methods could foster outside of arts contexts. These questions led to my work as a member of an international team of industrial designers in Jiangnan University School of Design. Back up just a little bit. When I first got to DAP, as it's called, the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning, I was hired in as an art education professor, an assistant professor. So if you've not gone through that process yet, you apply to a posting and you get this job. Little did I know I'd landed in a place that was going to be a very stimulating situation for me. in that College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning, there are those schools. And the building was very different than the building that I did my art education studies in, which was Hopkins Hall, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with, but it was very divided up, and we knew that the artists were in one part of the building and the art educators were in another. But when I got to DAP, everything was mixed together. The building looks like this, and when you walk in, it's kind of like a layer cake from the outside. When you walk in, there's lots of open spaces. Critiques are happening out in the hallways. It's just a really vibrant place. When I walked in for my interview, there was a giant gun, I mean, like as large as these seats here, made out of Cheetos in the main atrium area, and I thought, okay, this is very different than OSU, and I have to, explore this. And I did. I fell in love with the school and the city. Developed a course at at DAP based on the work that I did at OSU in the Criticizing Television course. This course was called The Art of Words, Writing Visual Culture. We did not have any courses that spoke specifically to artists and creative practitioners about the writing that they do in their practice. And having no training in writing, but going through my education training as getting a BFA and then getting a Master of Art Education, teaching, I knew that writing was extremely important. So I developed the course not knowing what the kind of path that it would set me on and come to shape the work I'm doing today. About 3 years ago, after teaching the course and working with a number of students across DAP, architects, designers, MFA students, all signing up for the course, because they heard it was a place where you can discuss your writing, where you can get feedback on your writing from a number of different perspectives. The key to that course was the bringing together of multiple disciplines. And so imagine my surprise, though, when I was asked to join a team of designers to work on a project in Wuxi, China, at the Jiangnan University School of Design. So I went from teaching, writing, supervising student teachers, found myself in China on a plane with an industrial designer getting ready to teach a workshop. Had no idea what I was doing. But we decided we were going to use the 12 hours on that flight to figure out what each of us did. We sat in those seats, those really small seats, and talked about the theorists we were reading. We talked about how we do our work in our classroom, what really excites us. And by the time we got off the plane, we realized we had a very strong interest, both of us, in phenomenology and embodied experience, and that guided our development of a workshop. As I was working in Jiangnan University, it would somehow came to their attention that I taught writing in DAP. And so they asked me to start working with their students and mentoring the students in writing there. The problem is I don't speak Chinese. And I thought, well, this is absolutely ludicrous. There's no way I should be doing this. But they assured me that the students wanted to speak English. And so there was a little bit of English, and over time I've learned a little bit of Chinese. But that has come to figure into the work that I'm doing in a pretty profound way, that ability not to speak the language, to not know exactly what's expected of you. So thus far, one of the most intriguing experiences to have come out of my work so far is the learning about the importance of facilitating dialogues with people from multiple disciplines. In the research writing courses that I've taught in Jiangnan, I've learned that even in China, students are just as uncomfortable with writing as they are in the United States. They really, just like all of us, want to be able to communicate in a way that is, that somebody sees us, that somebody hears what's important to us, and somebody will respond, and we can do things together. So the arts-based writing methods that I've developed in my classes here in the United States combine art making and writing. It's a process of translation, like from one material to another, finding what holds, finding what drops out and is not comprehensible, and then working with others to figure out how something could be expressed in a clearer way, in a more powerful way. Instead of beginning with written outlines as we would in a regular English class, in these classes we draw, we have dialogic feedback sessions, which have become really, really important. For many of you in classes, you probably feel the same way, that some of the most important times that you have in classes are when you can simply talk and get feedback from one another, to really explore the readings and to stretch out theory in ways that are creative. So when words are no longer the guarantor of meaning, as you are, working and learning that maybe the writing that you thought was really very clear and that you got the point across beautifully, then all kinds of worlds open up. And that actually, too, I think embeds a vivid lesson, a new layer of critical consciousness that leads to the development of greater precision in writing. And that's some of the spaces in Jiangnan. So my work as a university professor in the US and in China isn't so different from my work as a practicing artist. Both are grounded in processes of coming to know something, figuring out how to articulate that something, and seeing what happens from there. The difference, I think, is the purposeful involvement of other people in the work, an entanglement of becoming with others that characterizes my art education role in the present. Yet I find continuities among all the practices. To put a finer point on it, the seeing what happens in the art process is, in my present work, a process of seeing with, a communal relational act. In this iteration of my practice, consciousness is connective, knowing is entangled, meaning-making is a collaborative, tender method of risk, tentativeness, uncertainty, and becoming together. So accumulation of uncertainties, there's one of the pieces from this series that emerged within and around the edges of my art education practices. It's out in the exhibition. This work, theoretically, is an accumulation of almost, perhaps, uncertainties, an assemblage of materials whose mattering could not be predicted, but develops in the context of critical, reflexive dialogues. Specifically, the pieces are feedback that I developed and composed for students' work, excerpts and objects of my own reflective practice, and thought experiments in and around my work in general. These are glimpses of the multifarious acts of meaning-making, meaning-seeking, meaning-sharing, mattering that circulate through my practices. Unremarkable bits of perception that make no claim other than, I see this, I perceive this. I am trying to express the shape and evocation of this. So in the accumulation of uncertainties, there are a lot of uncertainties. I mean, a lot. Within the vertiginous flow of meanings that we all float within, it's hard to know what really matters, what to attend to, what to ignore. I was thinking about that a lot as Melissa spoke. How do we know what is really important that we'll need to know for later, that we could use in some way that is transformative? So I've come to understand that these acts of attunement and expression are witnessing of subjectivities in process. And I believe that what we know, what we notice and what we attend to has consequences. The act of having been seen and responded to, even in the most subtle and tentative forms, expands the flow of meaning in our world, including more perceptions, more complexity. And from there, who knows what might happen. And there are a couple examples here of these uncertainties. One of them, entitled Can't Get Here from Here, where one of the reflections, I strive to see and say what art education is, what it means, but the intensities of thinking into being never arrive in time in the perceived present. In responding to writing with evocative replies that function as depth soundings, which is what I do with the work in the writing visual culture course, and it's responding to the writing with evocative replies that function as depth soundings or sensitized speculations that probe the fluidity of an expressive act, we engage in meaning-making as collaborative tender method, a performative and effective process characterized by exploration, risk, and tentativeness, and a sensitivity to the shared project of meaning-making. And this is a piece here in the exhibition that's made for an MFA student, Luna, from Iran, who made work that she had to, it's called the Geography of Silence, that she necessarily had to be silent about. Her work was about the people who were taken, political prisoners, and murdered. She wanted to engage in some kind of memorial of reading their names, and she actually wrote their names and then dissolved them. And so we had a lot, as faculty members, had a lot of discussions around how we would be able to even show the work at the Contemporary Art Center, because she was so afraid for her safety. So the neck piece that harkens to one of the poets that she was writing about, and also the book being held closed to silence. To the student who led us in a learning performance, as we listened to your instructions about what to do next, it seemed as if you were trying to decode the meaning of this activity, this text, yourself, as you led us through the steps. It seemed as though you were reading yourself into an awareness of what connects inner voice to external representations. Perception and meaning are at odds with one another. Okay, and after all of the abstractions, thank you, of the previous readings and the previous things that I make, here is where some of the sense-making has come into a more public form. This past year, I was selected, along with 5 others, wonderful scholars at UC, to be a member of the Transdisciplinary Research Leadership Team. We are tasked with creating a research project, something that addresses well-being, urban futures, digital futures for the university, but after that, there are really no instructions. So the work that I've done in the writing course in Jiangnan University, the experience of not being able to expect that you understand what another person, is saying or what they're trying to show you, has absolutely been a real foundation for the work that I'm doing. Some of the projects that we're looking at right now are climate change and its effect on relationships, gun violence, creative approaches to being able to get guns off, out of people's hands. We are in the process of ideating, and we'll be writing a proposal that is supposed to be scalable, and we'll see where we go from there. I will be able to tell you more about where we go from there, because at this point, I am in the flux of it, in the thick of it. Knowing that understanding is partial, contingent, contextual, and retrospective, I will probably have lots more to say about this later, and as you know, all of you who are here and doing the work, that is part of the cycle. You do the work, you reflect, you try to figure things out, and then write about it and share it and get feedback, and that's one of the joys of being part of this community. Thank you.
So now I'm gonna invite Dr. Crum back up and we take questions from the audience, comments, whatever. I'm gonna come back there with the mic so I can give it to you. Anybody? I'm gonna start off this discussion. No? All right. We can count on Mindy. We can count on Mindy to have something here.
Trying to think through it as you come to me right now. Okay. Oh, Lord, that's loud. So, Vicki, when you're talking, I was thinking a little bit about your idea of art making and writing as translation. And I was thinking about that process. You said you don't like to start with writing and text, that you start kind of with a different part of the process, with verbalizing, which I think is an interesting, a nuanced kind of counterpoint to this idea of textual writing. But then you also talk about starting out with making these kind of visuals, and I wonder, like, what is how do you get students to engage in that process, and what do you think is happening in that process, I guess? How does that enrich their writing? Can you answer that like really quickly and like two?
Yeah,
No, just,
really quick. Actually, yes, I can answer it quickly. It just sort of happened by accident, and it actually happened here at OSU in the criticizing television course, giving feedback on something that a student hadn't really intended to be part of the work. It was like some kind of inky thing on the bottom of the page that I made a comment that the clustering of ink was very much like their prose. It was very dense, and I just point out where the clusters were. But students, when you respond in ways that are surprising to them, they engage right away. I've never had anyone not engage. It's like you're being seen in a way that you've never been looked at before. And even if it's inaccurate, it still means that someone is engaged in trying to communicate with you. I hope that answers.
Hello, this is for Dr. Melissa Crum. I was really inspired by what you had to share, and it really resonates with a lot of my work and my mission that I aim to facilitate conversations, especially for underserved and underrepresented learners, because of my own experiences, right, in education and college. So bringing in the community component into it, I know that you get solicited for your work, you get paid for it, right? So what about for community projects that don't have much funding and that, you know, we want to be a part of because we want to be able to use art as a vehicle, a tool, a language to open up these conversations about diversity, but the money might be an issue. And that's one of the things that I struggle with right now.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm loud. Can y'all hear me? So yeah, part of the challenge is that where the need is, that's usually not where the checks are, right? So then what I've done is created a bartering system with those individuals. So, for example, if there's an organization that I think is doing great work, but they can't actually pay through with funds, so then it may be, do you have a professional photographer in the building? Can you take pictures of the workshop? And so then I can use those on publications or on websites and things. I'll say, can you get at least 3 or 4 people in the workshop to write testimonials? And then I can put that some. So those are some other form of currency that works for me. Or I say, if it's an organization that maybe they have some type of event, they have some kind of gala or some kind of something, and I know that people who potentially would solicit my services would be there, and I say, well, I'll do this workshop in exchange for like 2 tickets to your gala or whatever. And so then, and put me at the table with these funders. These folks. And so there's ways, so if they know if you know they don't have, if I know they don't have the funds, then we just enter into a system where we both get what we need. But the thing is, if you're going to maintain a business, you just can't do that all the time. But when they can, try and work those things out. Yeah, no.
Other questions? All right.
Also for Dr. Crum, I was just wondering if you could talk about one of your earliest experiences, like when you realized, or when somebody asked you to do something like in the capacity that you work now, and you realized that you could do it, you felt confident in taking on that challenge.
Well, it's a good question. So I don't think I've ever had the thought that I couldn't do it. I think it was about really, I think for me it was more so keep figuring out how to make it be more effective and efficient, right? And I think there was a time when the department, so I don't know if the department still goes to Brazil, but once upon a time they did. And I went with them. And so when we were in Brazil, we went to this museum called the Museum of Sugar. And something very interesting that I noticed with Brazilian culture is they kind of dance around. I'm not gonna, that's a generalization, but it seems as though they dance around kind of larger topics. So you think the Museum of Sugar, so we must go and like, see all this sugar everywhere. No, it's really a museum about slavery, right? Because that was the main crop in Brazil. There was this big photograph of this wet nurse. They didn't really talk a whole lot about her, but you saw that there were like these chains around her, and then there's like this boy next to her, and then we don't understand what's going on. I got really interested in who this woman was and how they're trying to tell us who she is without saying exactly who she is. And so I started to think about how could I use this photograph as a way to help people think about deeper questions about who is being presented to us. So if she's a wet nurse, that means she was pregnant at some point, but it's not her child in this picture, right? So where's her child? Who was she impregnated by? Does she have a husband? Where's her kid? Like all these different things that helps us humanize the people who are showing up in a museum that's really about dehumanization. And so I had an opportunity to kind of write about that process and what that kind of decontextualization, really kind of grounding it a lot in Bart's work. And I said, well, I could use this to help students think through images. How could I use some of that, not only Bart's theory, but some other kind of theory around looking and gaze to help us think through who is showing up here and how are we understanding and misunderstanding them. And so I took that and continued to try and kind of shape that to come up with what I'm doing now. So I think it was really about having the courage to really just mess up a few times and then kind of fix that, so yeah.
We have about 5 more minutes. Questions, comments, anything? 3, 2. Sure? All right.
Okay, this is for both of you. I'm new here. I've only been in the department for starting my 3rd year. What about the department or your studies here made it so that was there an experience, or was there a course, or was there a group of people that really helped you focus on a research trajectory, or I think a lot of us, like when we think about our work now, there was a moment that really sparked our interest in sort of the rest of our lives. And I ask this question a lot when I'm working with students who want to work in museums, like what was your memory, like your first memory of a museum that was so meaningful to you? So what about your experience as graduate students here made it so that you decided on a particular trajectory for your research? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Where do we begin?
Well, I think the Brazil experience was, I think, that trajectory. I think also I had a complex experience in graduate school, and I think it was more so deciding. Well, I'll say this. For the graduate students, if you haven't figured this out already, your advisor is almost kind of like a marriage, right? It's like you don't just like do the work, but you gotta like engage with each other. You gotta figure out, how they potentially can support your needs and things. And so I realized that I ended up having kind of like 2 advisors, and I realized I needed somebody to process with. Like, it felt like really heavy stuff, right? There was one advisor who I could really do that with, right? And I could really kind of be like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. Like, I'm in these classes with teachers who are literally dehumanizing students. Like, how do I do? And then I had another advisor who like really wasn't trying to do that, right? And so kind of thinking about how do you navigate, how do you figure out what your needs are to be successful, and who can help you do that? Because there's a good chance, just like in a marriage, your spouse can't be everything for you, right? And so you got to think about who can be what to you and what you need in order for you to move through the process most effectively. And so I had that opportunity with Brazil. I needed to continue to process that, and I needed to figure out where do I need to go to gain these skills that the academy can't necessarily offer me.
Yeah, and to build on that, I absolutely agree with finding those people and figuring out what they can do for you, and then also knowing that you have to bring it yourself, that you have to be the responsible one to go to them and sometimes nudge. But for me, I would say, along with what Melissa said, is just the investment of time that people made in me and in my work. I've saved the emails that went back and forth with professors who took the time to answer questions, and not just like, yes, no, read this, but to really explore the questions in deep and complex ways. And along with that, I'd say probably one of the biggest takeaways from here is keeping track of everything in a journal, in either a sketchbook or a research journal, and that has definitely come with me to where I work now. And I call it, in the classes I teach, low stakes writing, but just capturing whatever you can in an image, in a few words, and seeing how that accumulates. So I learned that here. There was a professor who had us start with a quote journal and then keeping a research journal. So that really was very formative for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Let's give them a hand, please. Thank you, ladies.